Parish orphans and retrogrades. My guest name is Paul List, and we're going to be talking about white pills. White pills, not black pills, as we've been doing on Rules for Retrogrades the last 6 shows. Welcome, Paul List. You are an author. You're a cradle Catholic. That means you get it. You're a cradle Catholic who gets it. You're a self-educated philosopher. So we're going to talk a little bit about the perennial philosophy today, a little bit. And you're an entrepreneur. In your spare time, you read Aristotle, Aquinas, and Tolkien. When friends of mine recommended you, I said, this sounds like my kind of dude. And we're going to talk about the darkness from a light spot today, aren't we?
We are.
So you're from, I'm in the South. I'm in the very deeply forested South of South Mississippi. You're in Vermont, which is one of the few places in the north. Yeah. I'm jealous because you're more forested even than I here in South Mississippi.
Yeah.
And you're a Tolkien guy, and the that means you love forests and you love the trees like we do. Well, okay, so what I wanted to talk to you today about in the first place involves, I would say, all 4 of those pillars of this channel, Rules for Retrogrades. But I guess in the first place, it involves education.
Right.
You and I were talking before we ran the camera, and we're talking about the infiltration of the church and the world, which now seems to be a single set piece.
Mm-hmm.
Deep church, deep state, involves a kind of assembly line of lambs set for the slaughter. And in terms of modernity, which I think finds its name in the title of this video that we're running right now, this involves a certain kind of education that was emplaced through, I'd say, the University of Chicago by Marxists. No, we're not just talking about DEI or woke stuff. It's more specific than that. And we're talking John Dewey, that seems pretty nakedly now to have been oriented to line us up like lambs for the slaughter for a kind of AI world hijacking. Did you want to say something on this preliminarily?
Well, all the problems that the West faces right now and Catholics need to be particularly aware of is the fact that it's all rooted in a Marxist, Darwinist education system that was planned, and it all had its origins in the Reformation. Really, I mean, when the seeds really came to be the seeds that they are, it came out of the Reformation, and it really blossomed, I hate to use the term blossom, but it really manifested in the Enlightenment, in the cacophony of confusion and sophistries that came out in the name of philosophy, and really came to an apex in John Dewey, and he was a big Marxist, big Darwinist, a huge fan of the Industrial Revolution. So he basically industrialized our education system, not toward comprehension anymore, but more toward indoctrination and a formation and a fallacious, pernicious information that steered us directly towards our heading right now, which is to own nothing in 2030, to own nothing and be happy.
Be happy.
And that's because we'll be joined with machines, and we'll be in the virtual realm, which in other words will be dead.
Yeah, the singular what? Look, how are you going to be happy owning nothing? We know human nature. Leo the 13th moved private property from being not considered a natural right. It's very close to a natural right for Thomas Aquinas. Leo the 13th, actually through the writings of John Locke. Not a lot of people know this. Mm-hmm. Leo the 13th had 3 researchers that said, actually, this is one issue that Locke was right on, that we're going to change the Thomistic teaching and say private property is not just a corollary of the natural law and humans' natural reason, meaning it's basically the same thing, but we're going to actually say it is the third natural right. Leo the 13th in Rear of Arms is the one that did that. So we know if it's a natural right, that a human being cannot be happy without property, removed from property. So when Klaus Schwab announces that by 2030 we will own nothing and we will be happy, there has to be some account for it. You say, and this is fascinating, I've never thought about it until you just said it now. The reason we'll be not displeased is because we'll basically be joined in the singularity catatonically with machines, and we'll be incapable of um, movements of the will, such as displeasure or something like that. Is that it?
Well, I think it was Aquinas made it very clear that the reason that owning property is our right is because we have a rational soul. And because we have a rational soul, we have the right to own property. It's pretty complicated, but essentially we're being very clearly pushed into transhumanism and pushed into the virtual reality under the guise of being happy. What we will own will be nothing. It'll be a complex series of ones and zeros in a delusion, but ultimately we'll be dead because there is no downloading our souls into a machine. That's an Alan Turing idea, and here it is upon us. And it all really stems from Descartes' dualism. All of this punishing, devastating evils that we see, and they're shoving down up the poor kids' throats in school who don't know any better. It comes from this misunderstanding of our nature, not as a substantial unity anymore, as Aquinas pointed out, where the body and the soul are inseparable except by death. They need each other, and they're conceived at the same moment at conception. We're split in half now, and the body becomes ripe for manipulation and as a machine, and it's all mechanism. It's all part of this mechanistic view of reality, and human beings in the body fall into that. And then we go for this transgenderism, because after all, our bodies are just a machine. They can be changed any way we want. And now that they're separate, we can do separate things with the body and separate things with the soul. And ultimately, Turing's idea was to build a machine to bring back the soul of his dead childhood friend to occupy this machine. And here we are. It's got its roots in Descartes, but it really came to fruition, technological, mathematical fruition, in Alan Turing's work.
Let's trace this out slowly, because it's really important what you're saying, and it's not quite as rudimentary as conservatives that listen to conservative mainstreams are taught to believe. The progression of the systemic, I don't know, I'm trying to think of exactly what it is. Devolution. Let's just call it a systemic devolution that stems into modernity, through modernity into postmodernity. Ultimately, we're going to say, I think you and I will say, the solution is something like the perennial philosophy channeled through the narrative voice of Tolkien. I think is something like the white pill here. That seems to be your claim, and I agree with it. Yeah. But I want to go through the devolution with you, because you mentioned some ideas that told me, like a tuning fork, you get, and mentioning Bacon and Descartes together as kind of the two figureheads of the Enlightenment shows that one gets it for a specific reason. I'll explain in a second, but let's walk through this together. So first off, in the 16th century, we have the Protestant Enlightenment, which uncouples Christianity from the natural law. This is most specific. It also desacralized Christianity. It pitched a desacralized Christianity, a Christianity that doesn't have the sacraments, but and that's a kind of supernatural uncoupling. But the uncoupling of Christians from the world via the divorce of the Christian mind from the natural law was, I think, the most pernicious element here. And it led the way, it paved the way by about 100 years to what's called the Enlightenment. And in my book, Catholic Republic, I trace this. I say, look, Protestant Reformation in the 16th century and the Enlightenment, figureheaded by Bacon and Descartes in the 17th century, each stand for three propositions: the uncoupling of Western civilization from three things, right? And it's basically the three things are all attributions of nature. Christianity, for 1,500 years, viewed nature as moral, as a moral forum, as an intelligible forum that we can learn from and about, and as a teleological forum, a place where nature communicates these three big principles. They're all natural law interactions with natural reason of one thing, like a lightning rod. The human intellect can learn from and about nature and their moral principles, and they have a moral goal. That's those 3 points in one. Nature is a moral forum, even though you look at nature, you watch Discovery Channel and nature is red and tooth and claw. It's a place where human nature is still set to thrive, even though animals kill each other and pretty much just have sex nonstop. Human beings are different. Don't ask the red pill guys, but human beings are different. We are wired to be moral. And that's because of point number 2, the world around us we can learn from and about. And what we mainly learn is that our main task here, besides seeking reunification with Jesus, is to be moral. And then thirdly, we learn that our main task is actually the very goal, the centerpiece, teleologically speaking, of human existence, to be good. So nature is a moral forum that is intelligible. We can learn about it. And teleological, we are oriented to something, as the idea fixae of history. These are the three ideas that were first rejected in the 16th century by Protestantism. They were later rejected in a false dialectic, a false dichotomy, by the Enlightenment. And what I do in my book is I say, okay, Protestantism and Protestant reformers in the 16th century are the intellectual grandparentage of what today is called in America, which is very confused, the religious right. The religious right rejects those three prongs about nature for ostensibly opposite reasons from the intellectual grandparents of the Enlightenment, who are called in Americans' discourse today the secular left. They think they're opposites, but each of the three of them reject those three prongs of nature as moral, intelligible, teleological, for ostensibly different reasons, but they reject them all the same. Protestants reject nature as a moral place because they say, tulip Calvinism, right? It's an irredeemably evil place. Irredeemable. There's no real possibility of natural Aristotelian virtue. The Enlightenment rejects it because they say there's no such thing as morality, right? The secular left person will tell you, well, there is no morality. A true Protestant, a Calvinist, will tell you, well, it's wicked, it's abominable. Now, prong number 2 is rejected by 16th century religious right grandparentage, the Protestant reformers. Nature as intelligible, they'll tell you, no, sola scriptura, only really the supernatural words of Scripture are intelligible ultimately. Nothing else can be made any mince of. You get this really clearly and honestly intoned by Karl Barth, who said, natural theology is from the devil. You can't learn from the book of nature. You can only learn from the book of Scripture. St. Augustine was wrong. Enlightenment will say, well, the universe isn't really intelligible. And this is where Bacon and Descartes are particularly important, because whether or not you're an empiricist or a rationalist, there really is no there. There's no intelligibility that isn't just data numbers, like in the Matrix. There's no such thing as intelligibility. And of course, for Protestants, they kind of agree on prong 3 with us Catholic Christians, that there is a purpose to the universe, which is unification with Jesus, but it's not coupled to prongs 2 and 1, being naturally moral or naturally wired to using our intellects toward the intelligible, which is the outside world.